So today I want to speak to you about a few things, and I'm going to start with a wee story. There was once a couple who were from Minnesota in USA, and they were a married couple, and they decided they would like to go on a little holiday. Minnesota is quite far north; it's nearly Canada, so it was quite cold, and they booked a last minute. They booked a last-minute flight down to Florida, where it was a bit warmer, and it was last minute, so they couldn't get on the same flight. So they had to book one for the husband on the Thursday, and then one for the wife on the Friday. So this couple went down, and then the husband goes down on the Thursday, and he gets off the plane, he gets to the hotel, and he checks in, and well, this story's from a wee while ago, so you didn't send emails on your phone so much. And he said there was a computer in the hotel lobby, and he went to there and he sent his wife an email, and he typed away. But he forgot one letter from the email address, and when he sent an email to his wife, it didn't go. It went to someone else, and she must have had the same name, I suppose. But when this lady, so another lady who lived in Houston, Texas, received this email. Now, she had just become a widow. Her husband had died, and that day was the funeral. And then there was the wake, and then she came home and thought to herself, I'll just check my emails to see if any people couldn't make it, and they sent me an email to say they'd missed and they wish well and they have sympathy, or maybe there's something to settle with a bill. But when she opened her first email, she collapsed when she read the first line. And her son rushed into the room and picked her up. Are you okay? And then they looked at this email, and this is what this poor widow read on an email. To my loving wife, I have arrived. I know you're surprised to hear from me. They have computers here now, and you're allowed to send emails to your loved ones. I've arrived and been checked in. I see that everything has been prepared for your arrival tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then, and hope your journey is as uneventful as mine was. P.S. It sure is hot down here. Now, I tell that wee story there as a bit of a joke, but the idea I had from that story was that this is somebody who was considering the end of their life, maybe sooner than she thought. And I want today to, in a positive way, consider what it could be like about the end of our lives. Well, what I mean is, I want to think of what it could be. I want to imagine there's lots of time left, but what could we say about our lives when we get to the end? So I'll try to be positive about this. It's not I don't know, maybe it sounds like a dark, negative topic, but to think that there's lots of time left, but we're thinking, what will we say? In fact, I was reading a book. It's not a Christian book. It was like a psychology book on money, actually, on how people spend their money. And there's an activity, a wee exercise that this author suggested. And it's thinking of, if you could just now write your own obituary, what would you say? And what would you like to say you did in your life? And imagine there's lots of time left to fulfill those things. Now, this isn't a Christian book, but, well, as with a lot of the big ideas in life that come from the world, I feel that they're already covered in the Bible. And, I would say, for my obituary, ideally, I would like it to say something like, well, Joe, he was a kind man, he was patient, and he worked hard. I would like him, I don't know if I've achieved these things yet, I would like this to be the case. I hope it would say something like, I'm a good husband and father, or a good friend. And thinking about what could get written at the end might help me put these things in my life. Well, how about this? I would really like it to say that he was a godly man. Joe had faith. Put your own name in there. It would be good to say he or she was a godly man or woman. They were at peace. and they knew where they were going. The idea of a good obituary, a list full of things that are, well, I think they're taught by God in the Bible. So when I read this in a book that wasn't Christian, I start to think, wait a minute, this is a real godly thought, to think that God's instructed us to be loving and kind and patient with each other, and most importantly, to make sure we know Him once all's said and done. On the other hand, what things would I not want to be in my obituary that I probably spend a lot of time doing? Well, hopefully not some of these. I hope it doesn't say Joe was a real moaner. Oh, he was really selfish. He was lazy. I hope that's not in there, but, well, I suppose these are things that can happen, well, sometimes to me and sometimes to other people. We try not to. I wouldn't want that to become the description of my life. Maybe there are other things we do that are a bit more innocent. They aren't obviously wrong, like maybe I spend too much time shopping or thinking of clothes or thinking of what car to have that might maybe to impress people that I don't really know. I don't think that my obituary will include my car history. So why would I spend so much of my time and thought thinking about these big things? I mean, some of these ideas are shades of grey. It's not all black and white. It's good to enjoy spending money and having things you like, but will I really want it in the summary of my life? So I'm going to talk today about what a whole person's life can amount to. And I'm going to talk about how without God, it is empty. There's a gap. And if a person has not made sure of their salvation, then what else does the matter? So I hope I haven't put you off listening anymore. I hope talking about death, I'm trying to make it talking about the life that we lead before we get there, and how to make it something that matters, something that will last. I think I hear of stories, there is still an emptiness in the lives of people who are rich, who are famous, who have what the earthly world would say is what you need to go for. Can you see the image I got there? This is me. I did my AI, got Copilot to make it for me the other day. My idea here is that this image is the shape of a man, but I don't know, it's ladies as well, it's mankind. And there's the whole life going on behind. I mean, you don't need to live in what looks like London, but that's just the whole life that's happening behind, and there's a gap in this person. And that gap is in the shape of a cross. And like these kids' toys with a triangle block fits in the triangle, that shape in the body can only be filled by God. And I have a bit of a theory that lots of people in the world go through their lives just so busy, thinking they're achieving so much, but they still have a gap in the middle if they don't have God. Now, I'm not speaking just out of some sort of wisdom where I've figured these things out. It's things that I've learned from the Bible and that God's taught me. And I've been up here before talking about, last time I was talking about how God is the solid rock, the foundation of my life. These are things that I haven't thought up. So, what is it that you would like to have written about your life when all is considered? So, it's probably a wee bit overdue, but I would like to have a look at what the Bible says and have a look at some passages to see that where I got these ideas. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 to 13, there is an interesting passage for this. The author of Ecclesiastes, before I read it, the author was, it wasn't a prophet telling the prophecies in that time. It wasn't a story of survival or what they did. It was somebody who was a bit of a thinker, a philosopher of sorts. And this writer, this author, was thinking about what can happen in life. So that's why I've come here. And the first part, which is about 10 or 12 lines, is all pairs of things that can happen in life that are opposites. And I think what the author's trying to do is describe all the spread of things that can be done in life, from one opposite to the other and everything in between. It's a summary of all the things that can happen. And then after it, he has a sort of summary or a conclusion of what he thinks. So I'll read it and see if we can understand it. So in Ecclesiastic, it starts here saying, "There is a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever, and nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. Now, I think, when I looked at this, I think it can be like quite a lot to take in. It's maybe a hard passage for me to understand straight away, so I maybe needed a few more reads at it, but there are a lot of different things in here, like I tried to explain, that are describing all different activities we can do in life, all those different times to do things. And I start to consider things that I have mended or thrown away, or times I've been weeping, or times I've laughed. And this list is trying to describe all the different things that life can consist of. And after that comes a summary. I mean, different from an obituary, but a sort of summary also. Nothing better than to be happy and to do good while we live, eat, drink, and find satisfaction in our toil. And these things are good in life. And the most important is that what God does in us will endure forever. That's the verse 14. I know that everything God does will endure forever. To me, that says that having God in your life is what will last. So it's a lot to take from this passage, but I hope the idea is coming across, if it makes sense, that only with God in our lives and doing what God advises in the Bible is of value. Because, well, I hope that none of you are living a life of despair or depression. I mean, Keegan was talking about someone he knows that's described that they were feeling depressed. Well, I'm sure there are people who are like that in life. And if we think about those people, I suppose someone who is struggling like that, they probably realize they don't have a fulfilling passion, a driving, satisfying force in their life. I would say that they would look quite like that. There's a gap there, and they maybe don't realize it, that it can only be filled by God. But I think there are also people who appear to be doing well and appear to have all they want, but live in despair and struggle. So I don't mean to be putting any of my own ideas in about what people are doing in their lives, but I do have a theory that there are probably a lot of people who seem to be doing well, and in actual fact, once they finish their day and they lie down, they feel a bit empty. Do you know, if you Google celebrities with depression, you'll find a lot of results. And the point is, celebrity is an idea of something that a lot of people would like. They would like to be rich and do glamorous things around the world. And a lot of people would like to be famous and have other people applaud what they do. But you find that these celebrity people, through no fault of their own, they're not bad people, but can be empty and be depressed about where they've arrived. You know, I was talking to Kyle at the start, and he said, oh yes, there are all these, and we thought of quite a few famous people, famous singers who would stand on the stage in a band, and there are thousands cheering their name, and yet they'll go back to, imagine, a hotel and sit there feeling empty, thinking, what good is any of this? Do you know, I want to tell you a story about an incredibly wealthy family who would appear to have it all, and how their obituary, their description of life and all these people wasn't good. It's a family that I hadn't heard of. They're from New York, and they lived in the sort of 1850, 1860 up till 19... they were called the Vanderbilts. Now, this family had an old man called Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he built a shipping business and a railroad business that was incredibly successful, and he had millions of dollars, which it says by today's equivalent fortune was $3 billion. Now that's like 3,000 millions. So like $1 million would make a big difference, but he had $3,000 million. So he is incredibly wealthy. He's successful. They start as a family to build these big buildings, not quite monuments, but just in a way monuments to their wealth. In fact, as an example of how well off they were, if you imagine Manhattan, New York, this incredibly expensive place to own property, at the south end, or I'm not sure which direction, but in the corner of Central Park, this family owned a whole big block. And they built the largest private residence ever made in New York, even to this day. And that was an example of how much they had. And they went on to build other buildings and places around America as an example of their wealth. And they were really not sure what to do with all this money. So anyway, this super rich man, at 82 years old in 1877, he dies and leaves his money to his children. And they inherit a fortune so that they never need to work. They have all that they could ever have. And such is their fortune that neither do the children coming after, the grandchildren level. But by the time this family gets to the great-grandchild stage, all the money is gone. $3 billion, and none of the descendants had any of the money left. And you know what this says to me? Here's a fortune to start your life, so you never need to make any effort. And what happens? All the money will disappear. They blow it all. In fact, not only did they blow it all, but they were described by the people who knew them as lazy, entitled, and selfish people who didn't live happy lives with all of this. This is an example of a family and a number of children, and they all had everything that you would imagine you'd like, but it turns out they weren't happy people with it. And so that tells me a clear answer that it's not what will fulfill you, and that this image, this is the way to live that will complete your life. I mean, I say all that. Sometimes I think, maybe I'd like to win the lottery and I'll try out having loads of money. I'm sure I could make it work, but I think the message is it's not what we're to look for. Now, what else does the Bible say about this rather than my own stories? The Ecclesiastes told us that God makes the only things that last. That's what'll be worth it at the end. Here's another story from the Bible, and when I looked it up, I couldn't believe how short it is. It's Jesus speaking, and it's a parable about life, but it's so powerful. And it's from Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 to 46. And it says this: "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. Then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. And when he found one of great value, he went away and he sold everything he had and he bought it. And it's a very short story, but it's a great idea. To me, I start imagining all the things I own that are the most valuable, like maybe my house and then the car, and then I don't know if my TV's worth a lot. But what would I do? Would there be that I would want to sell everything I have to gain that? That's how powerful it is to find the kingdom of heaven. And that's the Bible confirming what I'm saying, that only the kingdom of heaven is worth it all. So that story very quickly challenges us to see that knowing Jesus and knowing God is the most important thing we could ever find. So all this talk of having God in our lives and a cross-shaped gap, I've been looking at it from the point of view of avoiding the negatives, avoiding being empty and avoiding being in maybe despair or struggling. But I think it should also be a real positive message for us. There is so much promised in the Bible that tells us this life can be joyful with God in it. It's not just about avoiding what's wrong because it's a dangerous, bad position. It's that the life we live here can be amazing. Now, not easy in plain sailing. The Bible has lots of stories of difficult times, but there are testimonies of people who walk through life with God by their side, and they are joyful, even in the face of difficulties. So here's an example I have of someone who lived a life that, well, at least I would consider really difficult, even awful. Now, I suppose I'm speaking to people who go to church, and you might have heard of Joni Eareckson. Ever heard of this lady? So I'll just bring up, even if you have heard a wee story. Here's the wee biography from her. It's from her Wikipedia, so this actually leaves out so much of how she's a Christian, but it's all based on that. So this lady she had a very active life all throughout growing up. It says she enjoyed riding horses, hiking, tennis, and swimming. But on July the 30th, 1967, at the age of 17, Joni dived into Chesapeake Bay, and after misjudging the shallowness of the water, she had a fracture between the 4th and 5th vertebrae in her back, and she became a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the shoulders down. During her 2 years of rehabilitation, according to her autobiography, Joni experienced anger, depression, suicidal thoughts, and religious doubts. No wonder, I would say. However, during occupational therapy, she learned to paint. This is where I think the biography misses, with God by her side. But it's important to say also that she learned to paint with a brush in her teeth. She began selling her artwork. And to date, she has written over 40 books. That's Christian books. Recorded several musical albums. She's starred in an autobiographical movie of her life, and she's an advocate for people with disabilities, meeting with presidents and important people making decisions in America over years. All these things she's done in a life that I would have thought had so much taken away from her, but she's got what she needs. And every picture, when you Google and then images, she's smiling all the time. And she's living a life that, to me, seems like there's so much taken away, but with God in it, it's an example of how she is fulfilled. So, I don't understand how that would be, but God works in a way that I don't understand. So having something seemingly so bad happen, I think this is an example that, well, I've got more than that, and I should still lean on God and find Him, look to Him for my fulfillment and joy in my life. You know, sometimes when I'm sitting there and listening to the service, you can hear do you ever hear the kettle urn do like a reboil? Sometimes I wonder if that's like a wee signal that it's like, it's time to wrap it up. I was wondering if it would go off when I'm preaching, but I am coming towards the end when we can go and have a wee cup of tea or something. But I would like to just invite Lorraine to come up while I just wrap up, and I've got one more little thing to say. I want to look back at the first reading in Ecclesiastes in verse 11, and I didn't look at it, we might have missed it. It said there, He, that's God, He has also set eternity in the human heart. I think, wow, what does that mean? Eternity in the human heart. I mean, does that mean that in the middle of our lives there's a gap that is enormous that only God can fill? Well, I think so. Or does that mean that everybody knows in their heart that there is an eternity, there's a vastness, there's something there that's missing? Well, I'm convinced that it can only be filled with God, following Him and His purpose in our lives. So let's finish there, and I'll let Lorraine lead us in worship, and then I'll come back over and say a little prayer to take us to the tea and coffee. Thank you.